So, our topic for today is going to be about homeostasis. Homeostasis is the way your body maintains its internal environment. So, our bodies are constantly put in new environments, either with temperature or with water amounts or oxygen versus CO2 levels, and our bodies have to compensate for those changes in environment. And homeostasis is how we make sure that our bodies stay alive when faced with these different environments. So in organisms that are multicellular, like humans and like a dog or a cat, things you think of as animals, our organs are responsible for maintaining homeostasis. In single-celled organisms, that responsibility falls to the organelles in those cells to make sure that the internal environment stays as constant as possible. So, your body keeps lots of different things within a range. So we have things like body temperature, which is one of the things that most people think about when they think about homeostasis. They think about keeping their body temperature the same. Not all organisms have the same categories or the same things that they have to keep within a range. If you think about body temperature, that's not the same for every organism across our planet. There are lots of organisms that don't worry about regulating their body temperature with an internal mechanism. Organisms like reptiles don't have a fixed body temperature that they're trying to keep constant. Their body temperature is regulated by the environment in which they live. They don't have an internal mechanism to do that. And that's going to be consistent with lots of these things. Some organisms will want to keep their blood pressure at a certain point, while other organisms aren't worried about their blood pressure. Blood pH, so thinking about, is your blood acidic? Is it basic? Is it around neutral? Those kinds of questions are things that your body is constantly monitoring and trying to keep within a certain range. Oxygen and CO2 or carbon dioxide, when those concentrations are out of whack, bad things can happen to the body. So your body will try to keep those in a certain range. Water, trying to make sure that you have an appropriate amount of water for your cells so that they are hydrated and functioning normally. Blood glucose, which is one we're going to be looking at more in depth with our activities during this unit. So, what are some responses you know of for controlling the aspects of homeostasis? So think about the kinds of things that we just talked about and think about what responses you know your body does. So things you might have listed when you think about responses might be, for body temperature, sweating or shivering. Those kinds of things are what we think of as responses to a stimulus, and that's how our body maintains homeostasis. We need to keep our body temperature at a constant level. If we get too hot, we start to sweat, and if we get too cold, we start to shiver. So how does homeostasis work? It works through a feedback loop. So a feedback loop is a series of cellular communications between specific organs to make a response to the perceived environmental change. So we're going to be working through a feedback loop. We're going to practice what a feedback loop looks like in class. So you'll get a feel for what that means. And I'm going to talk through a feedback loop in these notes. So here is a feedback loop. This is what a cellular relay race or a homeostatic feedback loop looks like. So we start with the stimulus. This is the perceived environmental change. So if it's cold outside, that cold temperature is our stimulus. The receptor would be the temperature receptors in our skin. They are responsible for receiving that information about that stimulus. They're going to relay that information to what we call the integrating center. In us, that's generally the brain. The brain is the one who is responsible for monitoring these different aspects of homeostasis and responding to them. That's not always the case, and sometimes the brain allows that responsibility to be done by other organs, but that's the kind of response center we're thinking about. So the integrating center is going to decide how to respond. So they're going to relay a message to the effector. This is the thing that's actually going to do the response to our stimulus. So in the case of a cold temperature stimulus, it might be our brain telling the hairs on our arms to stand up and cause goosebumps. It could be for muscles underneath our skin to start contracting really, really fast so that we start to shiver. It could be the closing of our blood vessels in our limbs so that we keep our blood closest to our important organs in our torso and abdomen. So that's the effector, the things that are going to make the response happen. And then we have the actual response. This is the actual action that's supposed to prevent the stimulus from continuing. So if we can close off the blood vessels to our skin and pool our blood in our torso, we keep our internal organs warm. That's the function there. We're not so worried about losing a limb if we can keep our torsos warm. So that's the response. And sometimes the stimulus can act, the response can sometimes prevent the stimulus from proceeding. So we call that a negative feedback, and that's where the product or the response actually inhibits the stimulus. So here you have this line right through here, and basically what this does is the response prevents the receptor from continuing to communicate to the integrating center. This means that your body has already responded to this stimulus and it no longer needs to respond. And why this is so important to inhibit the stimulus is so that your body can move on to a different stimulus. If you continue to respond to the same stimulus, you may be ignoring something else, or you may not catch that now the environment has changed and you no longer need to respond to that stimulus. So it's important that the product be able to inhibit that stimulus in the feedback pathway. So why is the feedback important for living things? This is what allows for a speedy response to a stimulus. It's what allows you to stay consistent, and it's what allows you to have an advantage when you're trying to survive. That's why homeostasis is so important. It is a survival mechanism. You're regulating something so that you don't have to worry about environmental factors. You're staying constant. That's why this is so important. I'm going to leave off here. The next video is going to be about teaching you how to go through a feedback loop, kind of introducing feedback loops for our activity. And then we'll have a last video kind of wrapping up some topics about homeostasis.